Hello, everyone. Man, it's been a while, and for that, I do sincerely apologize. Exclaiming to the world that I finally made a podcast only to take a 2 month hiatus after the introduction episode was not on my bingo card for 2026, so I am genuinely sorry for the silence and the absence. I can craft a lie to make you all feel pity and sympathy for me, and I can blame it on a family emergency or even create a fake death, but I'm not going to do that. The reality is, I've been feeling quite unmotivated for a few weeks now, and it's sort of a crippling lack of motivation that kind of comes and goes in waves for me with my ADHD. So I've always been someone whose emotions are pretty flatlined. I don't really fluctuate much there, but when it comes to motivation, like my desire and my driving forces have always had its ups and downs. So sometimes there are days, weeks, or months even in my life where I'm on the ball and my creative juices are flowing and I'm reading and writing and hiking and traveling and literally just doing all the things that I love with zero hesitation and with like a burning fire in my heart for it. But then I can go days, weeks, or months kind of feeling no sense of motivation for much. And I find I don't read as often and I don't journal or write as often and I just kind of exist. So I'm starting to get better at being consistent with my medication, which certainly will help. It's sort of a negative feedback loop when it comes to that. ADHD kind of makes it hard to remember to take my medication, yet my medication is supposed to help me with my ADHD. Nevertheless, right, I'm starting to feel a bit more creative again, and I'm starting to feel that lust for life once more. I always love when I am in these peaks and moments. So in the future, I will be sure to have a podcast episode pre-recorded that I could utilize in moments where maybe I'm feeling that plateau in motivation again. You learn coping mechanisms and how to adjust when you have ADHD. So I've learned that that will be mine. So again, I do apologize, and I thank you all for bearing with me. My goal is to post a podcast either every week or every other week. Unfortunately, because I've chosen to venture down a path, and I don't even know if unfortunately is the right word, but because I've chosen to venture down a path that does require much more thought and nuance and complexity and research even at times, some of the topics that I have in mind do kind of require me to read some books or journals to take notes on. And when I say require, I mean require by my personal standards for the quality that I want to give. Because I personally believe that if you are willing to give me your time, which I truly believe is precious and a commodity, I want to respect that by giving you quality in return. I know so many people who have started podcasts just because they love to hear themselves talk or they want to expand their following or whatever the reason is. And you can see that there's really not much thought or quality behind it. But I genuinely want to help make a difference, like I mentioned in my introduction episode. And so I think one of the biggest compliments is that people are willing to use their free time to listen to what you have to say, because people could take that time and invest it into something else, yet they've chosen to invest it into listening to you. And for those of you listening to me, and that's kind of wild and insane. And I am actually very grateful for that. So for that, I want to extend my sincerest gratitude and appreciation, but also would like my actions to speak louder than my words, because I can tell you that I'm grateful. I could tell you that I'm appreciative. Yet, if the quality isn't reflective of that, well, what does that really mean? They're just words. So hopefully you'll find that I'm putting time and thought and effort into these episodes because I appreciate you being willing to give me your time in exchange. So bear with me as I try to find a way to balance giving you all quality while also being consistent, being able to consistently deliver podcasts either every week or every other week. So I'll try to find a balance between topics that require either like a bit of outside research versus topics that kind of come solely from my mind or my heart and are simply only just my opinions and thoughts. I'll try to find that balance in between. And I also wanted to thank you all so very much for the amazing feedback and messages I received after my introduction episode dropped. I wasn't sure what to expect when I posted that, especially because, like I had said in that introduction episode, the idea of doing this, not anything I ever expected. I had a lot of people ask me over the course of many months to do it, and I was so adamantly opposed to it. So when I finally decided to give in and decided that I think this could be helpful, especially while we work to create a community, I just wasn't sure what to expect. And I have been so incredibly blown away by your guys' feedback and messages. I am not someone who likes fake apologies or fake gratitude. I think if you've been following me, you probably understand that. Chances are you're here from TikTok. So you probably recognize that in me. I'm not someone who likes fake apologies or fake gratitude. I don't want to receive that from anyone, and I will never give it either. I don't find it necessary for me to give that to anyone. So please know that I truly do mean it when I say that I'm so happy that so many of you are here and have joined me on this journey, as well as have sent me so many messages of support and positive feedback. I really do appreciate it all. I also want to add, finally, before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it, that if you're here, I'm assuming you are here from TikTok, or maybe someone sent you my podcast. Because of TikTok being a platform and where right now I'm at about 200,000 followers, I do receive a lot of DMs, and I will be honest with you, probably half of them are hate messages. I get a lot of hate messages because oftentimes the groups of people who feel some type of way or offended by something I've said are groups of people who are very blatantly ignorant and or hateful, and so they have no problem sending those sorts of messages. So it goes to my request bin, and so I rarely even open those. I have at times, and I sift through the messages because I do want to try to interact and respond to people who are on the same page as me and supporting me. Like, I'm very grateful for that, but at the same time, because I do receive so many ridiculous messages, I don't even bother opening them. So if you are here from TikTok, I am assuming that you are someone who's wanting to stick around and be a part of this community. So what I would recommend moving forward is, if you have any messages or feedback or even criticism, whatever it is that you want to send me, all of those things I'm open to. I will more likely read my Instagram messages. It'll probably go to my request bin, but I'm more likely to read it there because I don't have a big following on Instagram. I've never really promoted it on my TikTok, but I've always just had it as a backup just in case something happened to my TikTok account. That way people can find me there. So the only people who are going to be listening to this, I would assume, are people who want to be a part of this journey and want to support and be a part of this community. So I'm so open to you guys sending me those messages and having those conversations there. It'll be a lot easier for me to find and sift through rather than me looking through the messages on TikTok, which are full of ridiculous incels or right-wingers or whoever it is that I've pissed off that week. Anyways, let's get into it. So I've kind of decided to change course in the subject matter of what I want this episode to be about. I know I said that in my introduction episode, I wanted to do this episode on the idea of the soul. And as a disclaimer, that one does require me to do a lot of reading. I have a couple books that I'm reading because I want to offer you guys different perspectives from different philosophers, different psychoanalysts, different religions, and I wanted to accumulate data and research. So that one does require a lot more effort from me, but that's not the reason why I'm shifting or pivoting, actually. I had also said in the introduction episode that I want to be open to change. And I think change is a beautiful thing. I think we should all embrace it. And I want it to be open to that. And so that's why I'm shifting direction. The direction of this episode is what I want to change. And I wanted to change it because of something that has happened just a couple of days ago, which I'll elaborate further on. So I'm going to tell you what I want to talk about. And then I'll tell you why. So I want to talk about anti-intellectualism, but not in the same way that I do on TikTok. I want there to be much more depth and nuance to the discussion, and here's why. I was tagged in a video that a man had made calling intellectualism rotten. And it's not the video that is why I wanted to shift course here, but rather it was because the person who tagged me. So it was someone who doesn't follow me. And they tagged me in this video calling intellectualism rotten while I constantly make videos advocating for intellectualism and combating anti-intellectualism. This person's repost indicated that they were in contradiction to a lot of my beliefs on social or political issues. And then they had made a video themselves that I had watched, and that the whole combination, but really more so that video that they had made encouraged me to change the topic for this episode, but not in a way that maybe you think, because it's not to attack that person. In fact, I hope to validate that mindset that that person has, because I do have that empathy for that and I do understand where they're coming from. And so in their video they had said something along the lines of being frustrated with the fact that people don't take them seriously as an intellectual because they don't have a degree. And they feel like people write off their intelligence because they don't have any college under their belt, and that they hate that they don't feel like they can talk about certain things because of that. So I can't necessarily assume this person's intent or inspiration for that video, but they do seem to kind of believe a lot of things contrary to me. So maybe seeing my video on combating the misinformation being spread by the woman that was selling that sentient plasmid water was a trigger for them. Maybe it wasn't, who knows? That doesn't really necessarily even matter. But what matters is I watched their video and I heard what they had to say. And I listened to how they felt. And by doing that, I felt compelled to change the direction of this podcast episode, because I saw that this person felt what I've seen many people who have a thirst for knowledge and love for learning have felt before, which is a sense of feeling neglected or unseen or unheard, and or even abandoned by the institution of academia and by those who maintain an elitist view regarding education. And something I believe is that in order to build a stable house, you need a strong foundation. Therefore, I think making this episode is a part of me laying the foundation for the goal and the community of this podcast. I think my episode on the soul will be impactful, whether it's the first or last episode I do, but I think this is important because it allows me to address people like them, and it allows me to hopefully expand and make more people feel welcomed, all while talking about anti-intellectualism and why I'm constantly talking about it on TikTok. Because, spoiler alert, when the right-wing politicians weaponize and wield anti-intellectualism as a threat, that means they perceive intellectualism to be threatening, right? It's threatening to their rhetoric, and it needs to be preserved. The intellectualism needs to be preserved. It needs to be promoted, protected, and encouraged. When the right-wing politicians are literally spending millions of dollars to pay right-wing grifting content creators like the trad wives we see, the red pill incel manosphere, alpha male family value creators, they literally spend millions of dollars paying them to spread misinformation and anti-intellectualism. That means that we have to do our best to combat that, but that's also very telling that they see it as a threat. They are spending millions and millions of dollars to do so, to demonize and combat intellectualism on their side. That's what they're paying for it for. And so that's telling. There's something about intellectualism that is threatening to them, that is threatening to their rhetoric, that is threatening to their platform. And guess what? I'm not getting paid to do this. I'm not getting paid to combat it in the way that those right-wing influencers and grifters are being paid to spread it. I just genuinely think it's that important, and I feel like I see just how harmful it is. And I know many people who follow me do, because I get tagged in videos all the time on TikTok when, someone is very clearly engaging in anti-intellectual rhetoric and talking points. I think it's important to go more in depth and have more nuance on it. And the way I want to approach it is by talking about the importance and value of intellectualism and why it needs to be preserved and defended and protected, all while acknowledging and understanding and explaining the role that the institution of academia itself has played in the mistrust that people have towards academia, and why it's so easy for right-wingers to weaponize anti-intellectualism. There's a reason for it, and academia does play that role. I want to talk about both of those things. So essentially my framework for this episode is this. I'm going to talk about who is welcomed here, and I'm going to talk about what anti-intellectualism is and how both the average person and the institution of academia itself are both at fault for why the right can so easily leverage it as a tool of propaganda towards their audience. Because yes, the institution of academia is not without its faults. We'll discuss that as well. So to start, I do not and never have equated one's intellectual capabilities to their education status, simply because I advocate for intellectualism and the integrity of credibility. And I will elaborate further on that. But two, there is no bar that is set of where you have to be in life to be here and to be a part of the space and community. Really. I think as long as you just want to be better, to do better, if you want to learn and grow, if you are more than welcomed here, and I encourage it if those are parts of you. You don't have to be put together. You don't have to have it all together. In fact, you could be listening to this right now as someone who has spent their lives hurting those around them. But if from this point forward, you say to yourself, I want better for myself, I want better for my friends, I want better for my family, then goddamn, you are welcomed here, right? This isn't a country club for people who have it all together. And I've never wanted anyone to think that I'm someone who thinks I have it all together. This is a community for those who want to be better and who want to be the best versions of themselves and who want to grow and who want to learn. There's no degree you need. You don't need a successful relationship. You don't need a career. You don't need to be the most honest person on the planet. You don't need to be confident. You don't need to be perfect. You just have to be willing to want to be better. Now, this doesn't mean you won't have moments of stagnation or even times where you feel like you've regressed. Those are normal and natural parts of the human experience. Bows do pull back for an arrow before it shoots forward, right? Like sometimes you're going to be pulled back before you shoot forward, right? Sometimes you're going to feel like you've regressed or stagnated before you shoot forward and proceed forward again. You don't have to always have it together. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to want better. Because by simply just setting that as the goal, you'll be willing to learn how to develop confidence if you don't have it. You'll be able to learn how to become more self-aware, how to develop emotional and social intelligence, so on and so forth. And I'm not saying that I'll be the sole person doing that because, like I said in my introduction episode, I hope that as a community, it's something we can learn together and encourage each other about. In my previous episode, my introductory episode, I had mentioned that I do plan on making a Discord. Now, someone had reached out to me on TikTok, and if you are listening to this, I have to try to find our messages again and plan it with her because I don't want our community and space to be infiltrated by trolls or red pill, incel, manosphere weirdos, because those are the same ones who enter my DMs. Because I'm someone who's not constantly on my phone and I'm not always checking for things, I don't want that to go wild with that sort of chaos. A big part of the strategy that they utilize, like the groypers, I've mentioned it before, I actually do listen to Nick Fuentes to understand the opposition, because you can't combat the opposition if you don't understand the opposition. I do listen to things that he says, and I do understand that a big part of the strategy for groypers, or however you pronounce their names, that group of weirdos that follow him, they really get off on and have a really big strategy of causing division and to be divisive and to cause chaos. I don't want that to be bred in our Discord. So I'm trying to make sure that I have a way that there are, guardrails and safety things that are implemented. That way people can be free to be open without me at least being concerned that somebody's going to go in and try to hijack that. I do have to reach out to them, but I want the Discord to be a place where people can share articles and books and TED Talks and journals and their own thoughts and their own opinions and encouragement and their stories of successes and failures and so much more, all that we can encourage one another to learn and grow. I've learned from so many of you who have already left comments on my videos or have sent me DMs, and I'm very grateful for that. You guys have taught me and opened my mind to different perspectives and to how many lived experiences are out there. I'm really grateful that so many of you have shared your vulnerabilities with me and or even the world by commenting on some of my posts, sharing your experiences, or even just sending me messages. Like, I genuinely am appreciative for that. And I'm glad that you guys feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable with me. That is an honor, and I really appreciate that. Now, going back to point one, right? I don't ever want someone to think that I think less of their value as a person or human being, or less of their intellect simply because they don't have a degree. The fight against anti-intellectualism doesn't mean that I view those outside of academia as having less worth or intelligence. Firstly, I personally do not tie the moral value of a human being to arbitrary things like that. I'm very philosophically minded when it comes to these sorts of things and would never believe that someone is worth less than or is a bad or evil person because of it. And I say this because, unfortunately, with the elitism that surrounds the world of academia, it's like there almost is a perception to some people that some people have, and they believe that they are better than those without a college education. I'm sure many people listening have experienced someone like that. I'm not one of those people, so I don't want to be perceived as one of those people simply because I advocate for preserving intellectualism and advocate for combating anti-intellectualism. Secondly, I also don't tie someone's intellect to an education. You can be very intelligent without an education. You could be very educated without being intelligent. You can absolutely have one without the other, and I've seen it with my own eyes in many circumstances. For example, neither of my parents have a college education. In fact, my dad didn't even make it past 7th grade. He doesn't even have a high school diploma. But my father's a very good man and a good person, and he's a very hard worker, and he's smart. This is not negated by the lack of his education. It just wasn't accessible to them, to my parents. They were very poor when they met. I grew up poor, and it wasn't until only recently that they even entered like a middle class status. My father loves learning about space, and he had dreams of being a pilot when he was a kid. He even has like 12 pilot games downloaded on his phone, like to this day, that he plays. I think majority of his 526 gigabyte phone, I would say probably over half of that are the games that he has downloaded. And they're all these like pilot cockpit aerospace games. Even a year ago, he even asked pilots on his plane if he could take a picture with them in the cockpit and sent it to the family group chat. So it's a dream that never died in him, and one that I think he could have achieved and had college been affordable and accessible, but it wasn't. That will be one of the points that I will make as to the hand academia plays in its own demise, is the accessibility and affordability of it. But none of those things are indicative of my parents' moral value or intelligence. On the contrary, I've tutored students while I was in undergrad because I did quite well, and school's always kind of come easy for me. And for most of the students I was tutoring, it did for them as well, because I tutored a decent amount of pre-med students. So I was tutoring future doctors, people who you typically associate with intelligence. But if I am being honest, let me tell you something. I don't know how some of them, how do I say this nicely, are even able to wipe their own ass. I don't know. That's just the nicest way I could say that. So I learned very quickly that someone could be very good at school and very highly educated while still being dumb. I am not one to make a judgment on those things in a person based on degrees. But, and there will always be a but, because nuance and complexity are required, everything's not black and white, this will end up leading me to the bread and butter of this all, which is why and how I think the average person plays a hand in why anti-intellectualism can be wielded as a tool in the first place. We're going to jump on into it. We're going to start with the role that the average person plays in why anti-intellectualism is so easily weaponized by right-wing politicians, which studies have shown that they do that. The right wing has actively gone further and further and deeper into perpetuating mistrust in the scholars, in expertise and credibility and things like that. That's been proven with studies. Why do they do that? Again, the reason why they do that is because they view intellectualism and scholarship and academia as a threat. Rightfully so, because the more that people are educated and the more education they receive in a college setting, particularly liberal arts, they are kind of forced to be a bit more open-minded. And with that open-mindedness, with the interactions with more diversity within the student, like all of these things are a threat to conservative, traditional values that the right wing holds. We'll start with the average person's hand that they play, but then we'll also talk and go more in depth, and I will utilize studies to explain the hand and the role that the institution of academia as a whole also has to play. Because two things can be true at once. Oftentimes there are many things that are true at once. I think if you're here, you guys are people who understand nuance. I don't think I have to specify all the outliers. I think you understand that there are always going to be exceptions to the rules. I don't think I have to specify every exception that exists. I don't think you guys are people who engage in whataboutisms. So bear with me. I'm going to try not to be too general, but at the same time, I don't think I have to be specific about every exception. Let's go ahead and start with the role that the average person plays. And I truly believe it's because of intellectual insecurity and intellectual arrogance. No one wants to be perceived or described as dumb. Now, what I try to do is I try to utilize critical thinking and logic over emotion. What does emotions tell us? It's harsh to say that someone is dumb. But if we eliminate the emotional aspect of it, like the sympathy and compassion, I'm not saying that you have to do that, but what I'm saying is when addressing objective truth, sometimes it's better to kind of put the emotion to the side for a moment. Because the reality is, because no one wants to say it because it does seem harsh, is that some people just are dumb. And that is okay, because that is not indicative of their moral value or their worth, but that's just kind of an objective truth. You have people who are intellectually insecure or intellectually arrogant because they are dumb. But then you also have, which is most people who are just average, but even people who are smart, who also engage and embody and embrace and have an intellectually insecure mindset or an intellectually arrogant mindset as well. Now, of course, intelligence is on a spectrum, and there are all sorts of types of intelligence that exist. But even then, even in those categories, there will be people who are strong at it and weak at it, and most people will be average at it. I will say right now that my logical and cognitive intelligence far outweighs my emotional intelligence. My emotional intelligence is something that I'm still working. I have to work very hard at, because I don't think I naturally have it. So I have to work at it. I don't think I'm natural in it whatsoever. That's a deficit of mine. But I'm willing to admit that, and I'm willing to say that, because that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. That doesn't mean that I have lesser value. And because I am secure in myself and confident with myself, I am willing to address my faults and flaws and mistakes in the areas I need to grow in and work in. But no one wants to be the one that's dumb. Everyone wants to be funny. Everyone wants to be charismatic. Everyone wants to be smart. Everyone wants to be cool. But not everyone can be, and not everyone is. That's just kind of a objective truth about it if we remove emotion. Now, of course, we add emotion and we want to be empathetic and sympathetic and compassionate, and we should be. But at the same time, I think that understanding that there are people all over the spectrum of intelligence helps us understand why people are also a part of why anti-intellectualism can be weaponized. Again, whether you are dumb, average, smart, whether you are emotionally intelligent or unemotional, like you're not emotionally intelligent, socially intelligent, not socially intelligent, none of these things mean that you are worth less or more than anyone else. There is no moral tie to these things. Now, there are intelligent people who are blatantly horrible people, and they are absolute deviants and devils reincarnate. I've met some of them. And there are people who aren't as smart, but who are so loving and caring and compassionate and kind and would give the shirt off of their back to anyone in need. So I would say, in that predicament, the intelligent person who acts out on that evil is significant. I would say they are worth less. I think they do less for society when they are acting out on that evil and they're vindictive and they're manipulative. I think they are worth less than the person who maybe isn't as smart, but they act out of love and kindness and compassionate, and they help better the world. I think those things, that's where we can find moral weight in someone's value. If you are evil and perpetuating harm and causing pain and suffering and inflicting cruelty, I do think that you as an individual have less moral worth and value to society. I think your worth and value in society has to do with what you contribute back and the good and the love and the kindness you give back to the world. But that's just my personal opinion. That's just kind of how I perceive it and where I stand. Nevertheless, I would say that when it comes to this conversation of intellectual insecurity and intellectual arrogance, anyone can be someone who wields it. Anyone can be someone who embodies it. You can be extremely intelligent and still be intellectually insecure. You can be extremely intelligent and be intellectually arrogant. You can be average and be intellectually insecure, intellectually arrogant. You can be dumb and be intellectually insecure, intellectually arrogant. Some people know that they are not the smartest, and they're insecure about it. Some people who are average or smart, because of how much they care about how others perceive them and are desperate for validation, they then become intellectually insecure. And sometimes the contrary is true. Sometimes people are dumb and they compensate for it with arrogance. Sometimes people are average or smart and they feel compelled to respond arrogantly. Like, think of the Dunning-Kruger effect. People overestimating their intelligence, knowledge, or abilities. Well, they tend to be intellectually arrogant. There's two extremes. And I think a perfect example of that I can think of as an analogy, and it's kind of going to be reaching, but it kind of does relate. So I think you'll understand what I'm saying. But Quentin Tarantino, okay? That man is a predator, so I don't feel bad saying that he's hideous. I've never met, I mean, come on, let's be real. Sorry, he's kind of hideous. Not kind of, he is hideous. And I'm not above speaking on the looks of someone who's a predator. But he's a great example here. Quentin Tarantino, genuine, like he thinks he is Idris Elba fine. He thinks he's fine. That man thinks he's fine. Idris Elba's fine, all right? That's a fine man. Quentin Tarantino is not, but he genuinely overestimates his attractiveness. Well, there are people who do that about their intelligence. When the average person is so intellectually insecure or arrogant that they feel defensive about the idea of credibility and scholarship, they are playing a role in anti-intellectualism. They are playing a role as to why anti-intellectualism can be weaponized. Anti-intellectualism, I'm going to define it. It's defined as the hostility towards or mistrust of intellect, reason, and academic expertise. It often manifests as a rejection of scientific evidence, expertise, or scholarly pursuits in favor of common sense or emotions or gut-level beliefs. You'll see people who are intellectually insecure or intellectually arrogant say things like, well, why shouldn't I be able to talk about X, Y, and Z? Or you'll hear them say something like, oh, it's just a piece of paper, referring to like a doctorate degree. Or I can teach myself that, and I have taught myself that. You can absolutely be very intelligent without a college degree or education, but that doesn't mean that that gives you credibility. And credibility, which is attained via academia, is important. To deny that is anti-intellectualism, and here's where it becomes dangerous, because rather than listening to the scientists and the doctors, we have know-it-alls who think their intelligence is equivalent to the rigorous training and education received by the experts. So then they're perpetuating misinformation and conspiracies that are literally killing people. You have people drinking raw cow's milk. You have people feeding it to their children. You have people not vaccinating themselves and not vaccinating their children. These things that have been researched extensively for decades by the experts are being denied by anti-intellectuals, and it's literally killing children. And not only is it being denied by anti-intellectuals, it's being perpetuated by right-wing politicians and right-wing grifting content creators. Those are only two small examples of the vastness of the harms that this rhetoric can cause. Intellectual humility and intellectual security is what we need more of. More people need to accept the fact that there are just some things that you will never know the answer to, that the experts have, and that is okay. This entitlement that people have to feel like they have the right to believe that they know everything and should be able to share their opinions is literally killing people, and it's harmful. You don't have all the answers and knowledge in this world, and that's okay. In fact, let's start with me. I'll go first. I am so confident and secure in my intelligence that I feel no embarrassment or shame speaking about all the things that I don't know a goddamn thing about. So I'm going to give you a tiny little list of things I know nothing about at all with every one of you. Let's start. Accounting, advertising, aerospace engineering, African linguistics, crop science, animation and special effects, Arabic, aquaculture, robotics, aviation, ceramic engineering, computer science, mortuary science, massage therapy. I can go on and on and on and on. I think you get the point. I know absolutely nothing about any of those things I listed, and literally so much more. In fact, it'll be easier and faster for me to tell you what I do know than what I don't. But guess what? Not only do I have the wisdom and intellectual humility to not speak about the things in which I know nothing about, I haven't tried to sit here and convince myself that I do know something about them. I've made peace with the fact that I, as a human being, will not and do not need to know how everything works. A lot of these people feel like they are these deep thinkers who are so smart because they question everything, when in reality, they are obnoxious, intellectually insecure contrarians who feel exhilarated and get off on sophistry. And they need to prove themselves that they are smart. Now, I'll end this by giving kind of an anecdotal experience I had with someone who was more on the anti-vax side. Not fully anti-vax, but kind of teetering on the edge. This was someone who had an opinion on a very deeply complex scientific tool designed to teach your immune system how to recognize and defend against harmful germs like viruses and bacteria. Therefore, this is something that requires knowledge in biology, virology, immunology, genetics, chemistry, and so much more in order to even understand how it actually works. Knowing what it does is something the average person might know, and that's different from actually understanding it and the developmental process of it. I pulled out my syllabus from a 200 level cellular biology class that I had taken. So keep in mind, this is an entry level 3-credit class, only one of the many classes that I needed in order to receive a degree in molecular biology. And that's only at the bachelor level. The 200 level course is within the bachelor level, which is essentially just the rudimentary level comparatively to a master's or a PhD, which are needed in order to even develop a vaccine. I went through some of the topics we covered, and I asked them what they knew about these topics. Again, this is an entry level course. So I asked them what they knew about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Nothing. What do you know about microbe pathogenicity? Nothing. What about microbial growth controls or cell division and growth? What about central dogma or operons and gene transfers? Nothing, nothing, nothing. Mind you, this isn't even a fraction of what was learned in that one entry-level biology course, which is the entry point of understanding biology. And that isn't even a fraction of what is learned in an entire bachelor's degree, which isn't even a fraction of what is learned in a master's or PhD. So this isn't to demean anyone, of course, because not knowing this stuff doesn't mean you're not intelligent. It just means you're not educated in it. And if you're not educated in it, then why have such a loud opinion on it, especially one that you feel so compelled to share with the world as truth almost? Someone could do the exact same thing to me with their syllabus and their computer science classes, and my answer would be, I know nothing. The list of the random special degrees I gave you, again, that's only a small fraction of what I know nothing about, and I'm okay with that. I think that's actually liberating, honestly. I think it's liberating not feeling like I have to have all the answers. And I'll end this part of this episode kind of noting this, because I do find that those who have been to college do tend to hold the same view as myself, because they know what it takes, being that they've gone through it. So they can attest to the time and work required. And I find that those who haven't gone are typically the ones who are very desperate to feel like they should voice themselves in all areas they think they have knowledge in. Now, of course, that's not always the case. Sometimes there are people who have never been, and they genuinely are very open, and they understand, and they are intellectually secure and humble, and they have that humility, and they say, well, I don't know, I didn't go for a reason, or I'll let the experts answer that. And then on the contrary, there's some people who have been and have degrees, and yet they still have this arrogance or insecurity, intellectually speaking, that they still feel compelled to comment on all the stuff. But I would say consistently, like overall, those are kind of how I find people aligning within those categories. But then I think it's also interesting and ironic that if I were to instead refer to blue-collar trades, those very same people would absolutely agree with me. If I said, I know nothing about plumbing, I know nothing about HVACs, I know nothing about electrical systems in a house, or car mechanics, or oil rigging, or welding, etc., therefore I shouldn't comment on those things as if I'm entitled to having an opinion on them, most of them would agree with me. Truly. Trade school is still school, but there's just something about a college or a university that brings out a deep level of arrogance and insecurity. And this flame is only furthered by the right-wing politicians who demonize college, claiming it's a breeding ground for indoctrination to liberal ideology and that your kids will come out as blue-haired psychopaths who want to kill babies and exterminate white people. Yet, these very same politicians who are making these claims and who are demonizing college send their children there themselves. RFK Jr., Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, all of these people who have spewed anti-intellectualism to their supporters are sending their children to universities across the country. Most of the Trump administration holds high education themselves, many of them from Ivy Leagues, and they are sending their children there while telling their supporters and followers, don't send your children. They think and even know how dumb or insecure and or easy to influence their supporters are. They think their supporters are stupid. And I mean, these people end up believing them, so maybe they're right. But it's a slap in the face to their supporters, and the fact that their supporters can't see through that. Why is that not something that they question? Hey, you get on there and you demonize colleges, especially Ivy Leagues. You demonize it. Yet your son just graduated from Harvard. Why? Why would my kid turn out indoctrinated and like this blue-haired liberal, but yours won't? Is there something unique and special about you or your child that I don't have? They don't question that. I mean, they want to question everything else under the sun, right? They want to question the medical doctors and the scientists who develop vaccines. They want to question the farmers who say, hey, let's actually like kill off the bacteria on this raw milk. Like, let's not just drink it raw. They want to question all those things, but they're not going to question the politicians who clearly are taking them for fools and just propagandizing them. But anyways, we're going to jump into the next point. We're going to jump into the role that academia has played into why this form of propaganda works. Understand that propaganda usually works by playing off of intense emotions in people, usually emotions like fear. Be fearful of immigrants. Be fearful of trans people. Be fearful of Black people. Be fearful of the Hispanics. Be fearful of academics and scholars. So when the institution of academia as a whole has not done its job in developing trust with the average population, it is easier to play off of that and to instill fear. I want to make a preface though, because all the information I'm about to share with you, you might be like, God damn, that's a lot of, wow, academia really sucks. And yeah, it's an institution. We're talking about a system. We're talking about an institution as a whole. It's going to suck, especially in the United States of America, because every major institution in the US, historically speaking, has always been riddled with elitism and classism and ableism and racism and sexism. And so unless the work has actively been done to undo that, those things will still remain, or remnants of it will still remain. And as we continue to progress as a society and as a country, these systems will also continue to progress as well. Now, I think we're at a point where we're either a bit stagnated or regressing based on the administration at hand. But again, that is their goal with anti-intellectualism. That's why they perceive intellectualism as a threat. We've come a long way. We have come a long way. So I do want to preface that because, again, when I tell you what I'm going to tell you and all the information as to why academia as an institution is also at fault, it might be easy to be like, damn, why support it at all? Because we have progressed significantly, and because valuing scholarship, credibility in academia is always going to be important. It is dangerous to perpetuate the anti-intellectualism. It literally kills people. And again, the fact that the right wing is so threatened by it is telling. Other societies highly value intellectualism, but those same societies also have a trust in intellectualism, and they have a trust in their news. For example, when I went to Austria, we were walking around Vienna, and our really good friend, whose boyfriend is in medical school, was explaining to us about the laws that they have out there. If you know about Austria, you know that that is where Hitler was born, and so the Nazi party really developed out there, and they had a really heavy hand. Austria has done a lot to work to try to rectify that and to try to combat and not allow for that sort of rhetoric to happen again. So because of that, they're very strict, and they have a lot of laws regarding this sort of stuff. If you draw something like a swastika, you're going to prison. If you deny that the Holocaust exists, you're going to prison. And one of the laws and rules that they have set for their news stations is that you cannot lie. You can't lie. If the government looks into your reporting as an anchor or as a station, and they find that you are intentionally misrepresenting something, misinforming people, or trying to skew it with a bias, you will go to prison. Like, it's no joke. But the people know that, and the government like actually follows through with that. So people can trust their news source, which is wild to think as an American, because we have on both ends extremely biased and propagandized news. But think of like Fox News when they were sued and they said, oh, well, you can't sue me because it's not like we're not really a news station. We're just an entertainment station. And yeah, that's wild that they were even able to do that. That's wild that people can brand themselves as a news station and as journalists, yet they are intentionally spreading misinformation and they are intentionally skewing things. For example, let's give an example. Let's say there was a bombing at a big soccer field or like a stadium. Let's say that were to happen out there in Austria. The news has to report on the objective facts of what happened. Hey, 6:00, there was a bombing here at this stadium. Blah, 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 people are injured. Blah, 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 people are dead. As of right now, we don't know any information on the person or group that might have done this. Okay, that is how they report, right? Objective facts, objective truths. If that happened in the US, you know what Fox News is going to say? Crazy, wild, terroristic, communist-loving Karl Marx fans with blue hair and bull rings, liberal, transgender, black people, they're the ones responsible for this. And you know what I'm saying? So they are already trying to demonize or misinform or weaponize, and that is not news, that is not journalism, and it can't be trusted. So there are societies that exist that do value intellectualism. And they do have trust in it, and they do have trust in their news stations. Right now, we're at a place where we can't trust our news stations, and academia hasn't done a good job to create and foster that trust with the people. Again, keep in mind, we've progressed a lot, but it has its faults and it has its flaws, and I'm not above speaking on that. So let's jump on in. Academia, as a whole, as an institution, has not done its job. It's not done its job in developing trust with the average person, and that is why right-wingers are able to play off of fear and even further perpetuate mistrust. They've not really given the everyday average person a reason to trust them as a whole. And remember, I'm speaking about the institutions. Historically speaking, academia has been riddled with every ism or ist or phobia you can imagine. And if you've been following me on TikTok, you know I hate when people weaponize those terms because it tends to undermine the weight of those words. When people weaponize those words and misuse it incorrectly, and a lot of the times they're doing it intentionally to try to perpetuate whatever bias, perspective, or narrative they have. So when I'm saying this, just know I'm being very honest. And I'm going to explain why. Like, I'm not just going to say it, I'm going to give you the reasoning why. But it's applicable and accurate here. Any sort of ism or ist you can think of, it's been riddled within and embedded into the system and the institution of academia. It's been riddled with elitism, classism, racism, ableism, and sexism. Think of a moldy wall. This is going to be the best way I can try to give an analogy. I always try to give an analogy. Sometimes it hits, sometimes it misses. So let me know if I'm ever missing here with you guys. But think of a moldy wall. If you just paint over the mold is still there. The problem and the issues, it's still there. You need to literally change the entire structure of the wall to get rid of it because the mold grows from within. Well, I think academia has done just that. I think the mold is the elitism. The mold is the classism. It's the racism. It's the ableism. And it's the sexism. And they've just painted over it. They've just painted over it rather than structurally changing it. We'll start with elitism. I'm going to just try to give quick overviews of all of these things individually. Like, I could honestly spend hours talking about each one individually, but I'm going to try to be a bit more quick just to give you general overviews and understandings, to kind of just to prove the point that there is faults and flaws on the side of the institution of academia as well. Not just the individual average person, but them as well. Let's start with elitism. Academic elitism is a system of beliefs and practices, and it attributes superior value to credentials and institutions and individuals linked to prestigious higher education. Rather than assigning the value of a person's education to credibility within that field, they will tend to genuinely believe that there is a superiority in one's value or intelligence based on that education. Someone's education makes them educated. It makes them credible, especially when we're talking about master and PhDs. It makes them credible. Someone's education should be assigned to that. Whereas the elitism, the academic elitism that is upheld by the institution and by elitists themselves, they assign it to the superiority of one's value. Additionally, academic success often kind of relies on things like networking, which is often related to nepotism, which is rampant in law and medicine. And I can go on and on about that. Academic success also kind of relies on awards, and it even hinges on publishing in high-impact journals. These things create an environment where prestige overshadows, or at least can overshadow the actual quality of research. And finally, there is a higher valuation of disciplines within STEM over humanities. If you've gone to college, I know you've heard of that debate back and forth. STEM and those degrees are taken much more serious, and someone is considered to be smarter or better than someone who has maybe a humanities degree. Now, if you know me, you know I love me some literature. I love art. I love philosophy. I love poetry. I love so much within the humanities. So even though my degree and my education was in molecular biology and in that STEM that is typically valued over the humanities, I've always found the humanities to have equal value and worth in this world. And it always reminds me of this quote from the Dead Poets Society. It's my favorite quote within the movie, where he says, medicine, law, business, engineering, these are all noble pursuits and they are necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. To me, I think that highlights the beautiful contrast and necessity of both disciplines in order for humans to not just physically have to live, but to want to live. And so I find them to have equal value and worth, but that's not what is typically the belief that is held within the world of academia. I can go on and on about the elitism within academia, but we'll move on to the classism. Classism in academia is a systemic prejudice based on socioeconomic status and background. And there's an article in the London School of Economics and Political Science, and it's titled, Racism and Classism in Elite Universities Are Deliberate Mechanisms Used to Maintain Privilege. So that article also talks about racism elements, but I'm going to share with you something it says about classism. It says this: classism in academia is a systemic prejudice based on socioeconomic status and background. It limits upward mobility for low-income and first-generation individuals through financial exclusion, unequal cultural capital expectations, and gatekeeping in hiring and admissions, frequently reinforcing institutional privilege. And even more so all of that is even more so applicable here in the US, given that college in the UK is generally more affordable because there's usually a cap on it. But the inaccessibility of college to those in poverty is deliberate and intentional. And that goes back to the point that I made about my father, or even about that person who had made that video. There are so many people who have a thirst and hunger for knowledge, and they love learning. And like myself, they identify as a student at heart. Like, they just want to learn new things. They love it for the sake of loving it. And it's a beautiful thing. But because it's not easily accessible or affordable, you miss out on being able to learn. And then you feel that neglect that I was talking about. You feel that abandonment. You feel unseen. You feel unheard. And then your intellect feels unseen and unheard. And you feel like you will never be perceived as an actual intellectual because of it, when the reality is you just couldn't afford to go to college. And so the inaccessibility, it is deliberate and intentional, and it's a way for those of the upper class to hold that power, right? It's a way for the upper class to hold the privilege and to keep it within their class and their group. Again, I can go on and on about this, but we have to move on. So we'll talk about racism within academia. Racism in academia, it persists as a pervasive structural issue. It manifests in exclusionary hiring practices when we're talking about hiring staff like professors or just faculty in general at universities and colleges. It manifests with a lack of BIPOC representation and even biased peer review and promotion processes. Scholars of color, they routinely face toxic environments and systemic microaggressions and disproportionate service burdens. And this affects their retention and tenure and even mental health. And in an article that you can find in the NIH database, it's titled Creating an Inclusive Community for BIPOC Faculty, Women of Color in Academia. In that article, it says, despite universities often projecting ideals of diversity and inclusivity, faculty and student demographics often tell a different story. Black, Indigenous, and other scholars of color remain heavily unrepresented in tenure track roles. And this doesn't include universities this is my part now, I ended that there. But this doesn't include universities that intentionally accept BIPOC students at a lower rate, which is why affirmative action was kind of important, because it required that it was at least proportionate to the population percentage. But there were universities, and still are, that intentionally accept BIPOC students at a lower rate, even if it's extremely disproportionate to the actual population percentages. Additionally, we see how the racism affects the faculty and the staff, but students and accepting the students. It wasn't until the Civil Rights Act of 1964. 1964. Most of us have grandparents older than that. If you're listening to me right now, chances are your parents are probably alive. I looked at the analytics. I looked at the age group. I got a lot of late Gen Z, but a lot of millennials that follow me. Chances are your parents were alive during the time that the Civil Rights Act was passed. And so the landscape of academia completely transformed with this federal legislation, because it officially made racial segregation and discrimination in public accommodations in state-funded universities illegal. Meaning that was legal to do. Federally funded and state-funded universities were legally allowed to discriminate against people of color up until 1964. And that was on the legality level. Like, we know that just because something legally passed doesn't mean that there wasn't people trying to defer people from enacting their rights. Like, we saw that happen with voting. When Black people were allowed to vote, they were still, and that was on a legal level and a legal level only, because in the South, they were still being, and obviously some places in the North still, but they were being coerced. They were being intimidated to not practice that right. Well, the same thing happened with college as well. Just because it was legally allowed in 1964, which is only a hop, skip, and jump away from us in the past, just because it was legally allowed doesn't mean that it was actually socially as accepted. Although there were some universities in the North that had allowed BIPOC people to attend college alongside white people, there wasn't really a systemic change until 1964. And then again, think this is Jim Crow culture, Jim Crow era. Intimidation, threatening, harassing, all of that, to prevent people from actually acting out on that right. Limited their access to all sorts of places and things, including college. Now, I can continue on and on about this. Like I said, I could spend hours on each one of these, but we'll move on to ableism. There's actually a book titled Ableism in Academia, Theorizing Experiences of Disabilities and Chronic Illnesses in Higher Education. And it combines personal lived experiences with a theoretical framework on how to expose how academic systems normalize non-disabled behaviors and how it marginalizes those who operate outside of that stereotypical norm. And it explores the systemic and cultural barriers that disabled and chronically ill academics face within higher education, whether it be faculty or students. There's a man by the name J. Timothy Dolmage, I don't know how to pronounce that last name, but it's Dolmage for those who want to look him up if you're wanting to. So he is a Canadian academic in the fields of rhetoric, composition, and disability studies. And he says this: academic institutions are heavily driven by neoliberal values of constant productivity, relentless output, and hyper-competitiveness. This creates an environment where non-disabled, always available individuals are the expected baseline, marginalizing anyone who requires rest or accommodation. And finally, in the Journal of Disability and Society, there's an article titled Ableism in Academia, Where Are the Disabled and Ill Academics? And within that article, there's a quote that says this: disabled academics, staff, and students often face severe stigma, forcing them to balance the necessity of asking for support with the fear of being deemed incompetent or unemployable. Now, additionally, colleges were first required to accommodate disabilities only in 1973 with the passage of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. This law mandated that any institution receiving federal financial assistance, which includes nearly all colleges and universities, must not discriminate and must provide reasonable accommodations. That was first passed in 1973. It wasn't until 1990 that the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, broadened these civil right protections to all post-secondary institutions, regardless of whether they receive federal funding or not. And then it wasn't until 2009 that the ADA Amendments Act, known as ADAAA, went into effect, broadening the definition of a disability, making it easier for students to qualify for accommodations. Not only is there a severe lack of representation of disabled people who are faculty or staff, but then there's a severe lack of representation of students who are disabled. Now we'll move on to sexism in academia. Sexism in academia manifests through systemic gender bias, wage disparities, and disproportionate caregiving burdens even. While women hold the majority of lower-level academic positions, they actually represent just over 1/3 of full-time professors, and that's according to American Association of University Professors. So even though women are, let's say half the country, they only represent about 33 to 36% of full-time professors. So this imbalance that you see, because it is an imbalance, it's not proportionate, it is driven by the entrenched institutional structures and unequal service loads and pervasive hostile workplace environments. Now, although some colleges in the 1800s allowed women, white women specifically, to attend their schools, that was very far and few. Like in the 1850s, there were a few universities that allowed white women to attend. Right? Many Ivy League schools and elite institutions, they really resisted and fought against coeducation for over a century, because in the 1850s, that was really when we first saw it in some universities, and the Ivy League schools were like, nah, we're not letting women in. We're not doing that. So it wasn't until the late 1960s and 70s that they actually started admitting women. For example, Yale University and Princeton University went co-ed in 1969. Again, when most of our parents were born. And it wasn't until the legislative turning point, the education amendments were passed in 1972, that legally prohibited gender discrimination in any federal funded education program, ultimately opening up millions of doors for women across the board. It wasn't until 1972. It wasn't until 1972, when that piece of legislation was passed, that it legally prohibited universities from discriminating entry to women. 1972. Again, just a hop, skip, and a jump away in the past. So when we think about how these things have historically always been a part of the world of academia up until the 60s and 70s, and for those who are disabled, even more recent, when all of those things were so heavily ingrained for so long, because how long have colleges existed here? A very long time. And it wasn't until, 40, 50, maybe 60 years ago that we actually started legally prohibiting discrimination against particular groups. That's wild. And so majority of the institution of academia's existence has been rooted in elitism and ableism and classism and sexism and racism. And so when you have a majority of your existence rooted in those things, like most institutions in the US, it's not just the institution of academia, it's most institutions. But when you have such a long history rooted in that sort of discriminatory process where you embody all of the isms that you can imagine, you then have to not just paint over that mold, you have to break the walls down. Why should women trust the institution of academia? You didn't even allow us to attend, and legally, until the 1970s. Like, most colleges didn't do so until they were legally required to. So why should women trust you? What have you done to gain the trust of women as a whole? What have you done to gain the trust of those who are disabled? What have you done to do that? It wasn't until, 1973 that the first real law was passed, but not until 1990 that kind of expanded that and was really more open to everybody else. But then even then, it wasn't in 2009 that the ADAAA went into effect. What have you done in the past 20 years, 30 years to let disabled people know that they can trust you as an institution? What have you done to let people of color know that they can trust you as an institution? It wasn't until 1964 that people of color were allowed to attend. It wasn't until there was a legal requirement. There was some, like I said, there were some northern states that did allow, Black people or indigenous people, whatever, to attend. But that was very far and few. It wasn't until the legality was implemented that these institutions begrudgingly allowed BIPOC people to attend school with the white people. So, what have you done to rectify that? When there's so many decades and decades and decades, over a century worth of mistreatment and discrimination, what have you done? And so there's mistrust that exists amongst all sorts of people, all sorts of demographics in the US with the institution of academia. Like I said, the institution of academia, we do need it. We do, because this is what gives us research on the environment. It's what gives us research on medications. It's what gives us research on childbirth. It's what gives us research on engineering, which we're able to use to design homes and businesses and buildings and mechanics for cars, and quite literally gives us all the ability to research and fund and make the world an easier place to live in for human beings. But what have they done to gain the trust? And I can't think of too much that they have done to gain the trust. And so this, coupled with the fact that your average person feels very entitled due to their intellectual insecurity and intellectual arrogance to think that they know everything and have the right to speak on it, you combine these two things that are going on at the same time, and that, in my mind and in my opinion, explains why it's so easy for the right wing to weaponize anti-intellectualism as a tool of propaganda. Because you're already able to play off the mistrust that is deeply rooted within so many communities here in the United States of America, within so many demographics that were discriminated against. There's a mistrust that already exists, because what has academia done to rectify that or to rebuild that trust or build it in the first place? I can't even say rebuild, because was it ever built for anybody but white men? What have they done? I can't think of many things. So you combined the average person not having humility to say, hey, okay, I'll refer to the experts because I understand they went to school for 18 to 14 years to specialize in this. You have that combined with, well, I already don't trust you because what have you done to earn that? And it becomes an easy tool to wield. And so, in my opinion, what do you do to combat that? Well, on an institutional level, I think these institutions need to go out to the community, and they need to serve their communities better. It's actually why I really enjoy when I see on TikTok and social media people who have expertise in things, and again, not simply just degrees, but even trades or even hobbies. We talk about hobbies. People who have been doing particular hobbies for a very long time and are teaching others how to do so. That itself too is spreading knowledge. But I do love when I see professors and experts or people who have these high degrees just spreading their information and knowledge with the internet for free. I love that. I love that I follow scientists in Antarctica who are studying the ice, and that's helping us understand climate change. I love that I follow people with PhDs and are working in ecology and are trying to save different endangered species, and they're showing you that journey and process. That's beautiful. On an individualistic level, I love seeing that, and I think that should be encouraged. And quite frankly, I actually truly do think that that's one of the reasons, and this is just my opinion, and I don't do the conspiracy theories or anything, but again, when the right wing wants to attack something, I think it's important to try to analyze and peel back the layers as to why. I do think a part of the reason why TikTok went through that whole, oh, we're going to shut it down, oh, it's this and that phase, is because they wanted the ownership to get transferred to a company that is going to favor and be biased toward right-wing content, that are going to be more biased toward those right-wing grifters, the trad wives, the alpha males, whatever. Because I think they understand how important social media is. And I don't just think that. I know they understand how important social media is. That's why they're spending millions and millions of dollars. You can look into it. There are a couple articles that explain it and break it down. These organizations that are right-wing quite literally spend millions and millions of dollars on these right-wing content creators for a reason, because they understand the power of social media. The left, for some reason, is so insanely dense when it comes to that. Like, you don't have a really big left-leaning content creator that isn't super extreme. The only one I can think of is an extreme leftist, but you don't have like a normal one that is at least representative of most people who are left-leaning in America. You don't have one that tends to be representative of the progressives or the Democrats or the liberals. You don't have that. We don't have that. But on the right, I could list you a dozen off the top of my head right now. And there are probably dozens of more that I just have not seen because I tried to avoid that sort of stuff. But there's a reason why they spend millions of dollars doing it. They understand the power of social media. So it makes sense that TikTok, what it was prior, was this space where people can spread information that's helpful to keep others informed as to what's going on that the news won't cover, whether it's in our own country or across the world. We're able to see that footage. We're able to hear the testimonials of the people there. And then you also have these experts who are being able to share easily and freely the expertise and information that they have. And sometimes that information combats the rhetoric that the right-wing politicians are pushing. When they're saying things like, don't vaccinate your kids, right? RFK, saying all this bullshit that's so anti-scientific and is so anti-intellectual around vaccinations. And he's expecting, and I can't even say, oh, he's expecting his supporters to trust him more than the doctors. They do. I don't even think he has to expect it. They just do. And they trust him more than the doctors. They trust what he has to say. But guess what? When you have an app that is full of doctors or virologists or immunologists who are freely educating people and combating that, that's dangerous to them. That's dangerous because it shows the flaws within their own rhetoric. And so they attack it, and they're able to weaponize anti-intellectualism as a way to do that. The institution, how does the institution combat this? Again, I think they need to go into the communities. I think they need to go into their communities and they need to offer free classes, free courses where you have experts speaking with members of the community, getting to know them, creating trust, learning names, building a foundation of understanding that you can trust me. I'm here for you. I'm here to support you. I'm here to better you. I'm here to encourage you. I'm here to offer you my knowledge and my resources. That's how you develop trust. You become, when you know, like they say, when you know someone's name, you immediately feel like you trust them more because you feel more familiar with them. Get the world of academia to go into the communities, and I mean all communities. Don't neglect the South Side of Chicago. Go into all the communities and become familiar with the people who live in your own community. You should be there to serve. The institution of academia should be there to serve the communities. And when you serve the communities and you get familiar with the communities, people will start to trust you. And when people start to trust you, when they hear right-wing politicians say things that contradict what the experts are saying, the experts that they've developed a trust with, they're going to be less likely to believe that. They're going to be less likely to fall into that propaganda. And then what can we do as individuals? We don't really, I know it's so sad to be like, oh, we don't hold that much power. Because comparative to these massive institutions, we don't hold that much power, really. But we do hold some. And especially when you start becoming a collective in a community, then you really strengthen your power. That's when you see the people, when they show up in numbers, that's when we really have power. So being kind of on the same page and on the same mind is important, but individualistically, what can we do? Well, we just combat it when we see it. That's the best thing we can do. We could just combat it when we see it because a lot of these forms of rhetoric are harmful. And not just on a physical level of, oh, it's causing people to die, but even forcing people to die intellectually. They're no longer curious. They're no longer trying to understand or seek truth. They're only trying to confirm their bias. They're only trying to feed their emotions. They're only trying to make themselves feel better about something. And I think as a community and as a collective, because I don't have knowledge on so many things, or I listed to you all those things that I don't know, someone here does know something on that. So you can fill in and you can offer that education and you can combat that misinformation and that specialty that I know nothing about. So then when you start building a community with people who are more diverse, either in education, either in trade, either in experience, in hobby, and things like that, when you have a collective of people who are so diverse and can attest and speak to or speak towards different people and different groups, and we have this different knowledge that we all carry, and we all contribute, and we all develop as a collective community, and we all try to do our part, that's when you start wielding power. That's why I've always said, I said it in the beginning, in my introductory episode, I said at the beginning of this one, this is not about me, what can I do? Oh, I'm so great. I'm going to teach you this. I'm going to teach you that. No, I am learning alongside you guys. I am learning from you guys. I am learning with you guys. And that's beautiful, because the idea of having a community, the idea of having a collective, and the idea of having a shared goal of trying to learn and grow and develop emotionally, mentally, intellectually, physically, spiritually, whatever it is, we share that goal. We share our knowledge, we share our stories, we share all of these things make you more powerful and have the ability to combat these dangerous thoughts and rhetorics. Again, if the right wing is threatened by it, they're threatened by it for a reason. They are attacking it for a reason. They are spending millions and millions of dollars attacking it for a reason. So peel back the layers. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? I have a lot of thoughts and opinions on it, but I've shared a lot of my thoughts and opinions now. I'm at 1 hour and 20 minutes. Jesus. I've been going on and on. I've been yapping. This is just my thoughts. Just my thoughts, just my opinions, just my perspectives. I hope that this allowed people to understand, one, kind of like my heart and understand where I stand regarding this. I don't want anybody to think that I perceive them as lesser than because of arbitrary things. I don't assign that moral value. I don't make that judgment on people's intellect because of those things. Not at all. And who's welcomed here? Just people who want to be better. People who want, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all together. Just people who want to be better. And then I hope you kind of understood where I was going. I tried my best to kind of frame that as cohesively as possible, but I think laying this as the framework is important. I think, like I said, building a strong foundation is important for having a stable house, for having a house that stands. And so I think this was kind of like a good next layer for the podcast. I think this is a part of that foundational understanding of where I'm at. And if you are in agreement in that and you like that and you want to be a part of that, you have the opportunity to do that. And if you don't like it, at least you found out early on that you don't like it, because that's kind of going to be the basis to a lot of stuff here. The idea of doing things collectively as a group and learning from people as a group and trying to be better and trying to be as intellectual as possible, but then also talking about things that sometimes are just perceptions, right? Like maybe the way I perceive something and the way that you all have sent me your stories about how you perceive things. So it's a combination of a lot that we'll be doing here, but I'm very, very glad and grateful for all of you who have joined and who have spent this hour and 22 minutes listening to me yap. My God, my jaws are tired. I don't know what my next episode will be on. I am going to refrain from assuming what I want to do because, again, I want to be open. So maybe halfway through recording my next episode, I decide I changed my mind, and I want to be open to that. But I will try to post again next week. Hopefully I don't decide on something that requires too many readings. If you have suggestions, if you have things you want to hear, let me know. I have a whole list of things that I want to talk about, but at the same time, I kind of also want to talk about what people feel like they have a need to hear, right? If there's a consistent need I'm hearing, or just something that needs to be touched on like this, like just something about doing this felt better than doing an episode on the soul. I want to be open to that. Again, Instagram will be the best way to reach me. But thank you. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I can't wait to talk to you all next week.